Hi, I'm Judy Puckett. I'm the Director of Women's Ministries for Chapelgate Church. Welcome to this week's video devotional. I love stories, and I'm thankful that I've gotten to hear a lot of your stories over time. I've heard them over a cup of coffee at Panera, sitting here on my back porch in the summer, gathered together in a small group at Connect, a late night phone call, a heart-wrenching email, a text full of tears, a couple of minutes after church where we get to chat. I love to hear your stories, and I've heard happy stories and sad stories, stories of hope and stories of despair, stories filled with tragedy and trauma, and stories filled with delight and joy. But what I love most about so many of the stories that I hear is that they culminate with, but God. But God met me in my fear. But God reminded me of His sovereignty when I couldn't have children. But God spoke peace into my life when it was nothing but chaos. But God, even though the circumstances didn't change, I was able to endure. But God gave me comfort. But God gave me joy. But God gave me hope. But God gave me strength. But God. And you know, it reminds me of this passage in 2 Corinthians where Paul talks about a treasure that's in a jar of clay. So we're going to read this passage in 2 Corinthians 4, beginning in verse 5. For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. You know, Paul wants to make it unmistakably clear that the power comes not from the jar of clay. And he contrasts the fragility of the messenger, this jar of clay, with the all-surpassing power of God. He says, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. Now, jars of clay were throwaway containers in the ancient world. They were an anonymous part of everyday life. They contained water or oil or grain. They were easily broken and easily forgotten. They were unlike metal vessels, which could be repaired, and unlike glass ones, which could be melted down and used for something else. They were ordinary, common objects. And Paul wants us to see that the contrast between these ordinary objects, these jars of clay, and this power of God. And how is this power of God, which is inside of these ordinary jars of clay, how is it displayed? And he goes on to tell us. He says, we're afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. And that word perplexed has a feeling of being cornered. We're persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. You know, these things that Paul's talking about are things that happen to us that come from outside of us. Things against which we have no control, like the betrayal of a friend, the infidelity of a spouse, being wrongly accused of something, being talked about poorly or treated badly at work, the onslaught of cancer or an infectious disease. These things are outside of our control. So how is it that these things cause the power of God to be displayed? Well, when these things hit, when we are perplexed, we aren't struck down. When we are persecuted, we're not forsaken. These are tools that God uses to put His amazing power on display, not because of the strength of the vessel, not because of our strength, but because of His glorious power. And the contrast sets that up. When Aaron and I got married 20 years ago this week, I bought him a wedding gift. I bought him this Taylor guitar. Now, I don't know anything about music, and I don't know anything about guitars, but when I went into the guitar shop, I said to the man, I'd like to buy the nicest guitar you have. And I had to make a layaway plan. They did layaway then, and paid a little bit for a bunch of months. But anyway, this is a Taylor guitar. And there's lots of kinds of woods out there that are beautiful and hard and really strong and gorgeous. Some are really, really beautiful and really, really strong. But the outside of this guitar, the part right here that you see, is not made of a really beautiful, really strong wood. And you would think it would be, right? This is a really nice guitar. Why not put that beauty on display? But it's not. It's actually made of spruce, which is a very thin and a very weak wood. Why? Why would you use a thin, weak wood to make such a beautiful instrument? Well, it's because the thin frailness of the wood makes the sound of the guitar project. Because what's most beautiful about this guitar is not what it looks like on the outside. It's the song that comes out of it. And the thin wood doesn't trap the beauty of what's inside. And the same is true for us. Our fragility and our weakness is one of the ways that God puts his power on display. We have this treasure in jars of clay. Let's pray. God, thanks. Thanks that you have this all-surpassing power that you have given to us. And God, we want that power and not ourselves to be on display. So would you please do what only you can do and use our fragility and our weakness to put your power on display in Jesus' name.